Hi, I'm Sandeep, and you're watching the Indian Weekender. Today is our Weekender on Sunday special show, and I'm filling in for our normal host, Ajay Vashist, who couldn't make it today. So, today our guest is National MP Andrew Bailey, who has drove into our studio, and he's looking very fit based on what he loves to do. I'm pretty sure you all will know that he has sliced all the way to North Pole and South Pole. We're going to talk to him about that as well. But welcome to our studio, Andrew. How are you today?
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
Great. Now, Andrew, from what I last checked to your profile, that you are holding a number of portfolios. I think it was associate finance, it was revenue, it was small businesses. I guess small business is something new that you have picked up. So, can you just double check how many portfolios you are holding now?
Yeah, I do have a few actually. Thank you. So I held before the latest reshuffle. I held revenue, which is another name for tax, commerce. State-owned enterprises, as you're probably aware, the New Zealand government owns a lot of businesses, like a shareholding in Air New Zealand, Kiwi Rail, etc., and associate finance. And in the latest reshuffle, I also picked up small business.
Which was previously by former leader Todd Muller, isn't it?
That's right. And the other one that I asked for, I said to our new leader, Judith, I said to her, look, no party's ever had a spokesperson for manufacturing. And it's a huge part of the New Zealand economy. If you go into any small business or even a large business, there is a substantial portion of manufacturing. And I said to her, look, why don't I pick that up? I'm very keen on it. It's an integral part of the economy. It's actually 10% of the economy.
Sure. Well, that's very interesting, actually. And when you say that you had that conversation, so I'm assuming that would have happened when Judith has told us that she has called every MP before that reshuffle,
That's
isn't
right.
it?
Yeah.
And that's when you probably advised and bargained or maybe created this new portfolio?
We don't bargain.
Great. That's the right selection of the words.
Yeah.
So we created this new portfolio. Well, that's really great.
Yeah.
And from what we are seeing, but can you tell us a little bit more about the pre-reshuffle or say leader election night when you guys went into huddle? How was that, and how actually you guys arrived on the decision of electing Judith as the leader?
Yeah, so obviously we have an internal process which I really can't go too much into, but I think the interesting thing, we heard at a 7:30 a.m. conference call that Todd was resigning. That was obviously very shocking. Todd was a personal friend of mine because we both came into the parliament together, and to hear that Todd was stepping down was a real shock, not only to me but to my entire caucus colleagues. But I think the most interesting thing is we heard that at 7:30 in the morning. By 8:30 at night that same day, we had chosen a new leader and a new deputy leader, and that is quite remarkable. And I think when we came out of that meeting, all good coaches talk to their teams and they say, we must act like a team. Well, actually, the best teams are the ones that know that they've got to do the right thing. They know that they've got to work as a team. And that's the difference, and that's the power of having a whole lot of people, 55 in our caucus, actually working together. And I think that's really, really important.
Sure. Well, two observations on that. What exactly you have told us that goes against I would say, the popular perception about Judith's personality, which people, they say it can be often polarizing. So was this suggestion of presenting a united face? And when I say that was very unusual to see you all 55 colleagues standing in front, or
wasn't it? Right.
Yeah, it was like parading in front of media. So whose suggestion was that?
Oh, it was popped out of the caucus, and so we all wholesomely picked up on the idea, because I think we're at that point where New Zealand's asking us to be unified. New Zealand's asking for good clarity around where we're going as a country, and we as a team know that we have to provide that.
Sure. Now, coming to issues that matters. First of all, business and small business that you have picked up from former leader Todd Muller. So what's your vision, or rather what you are going to do to invigorate this sector?
Yeah, I think it's useful just talking about the context. I wrote an economic piece 3 days into COVID lockdown, and what I talked about is what the impact was going to be on different sectors like the tourism, international education market, the farming sector, and also what was going to happen to population changes. When I wrote that paper, I think I was like most people who had a 12 to 18 month lens, and maybe after that period of time, basically the world and certainly New Zealand would be broadly back into what we call normality, right? I think now we are looking at something that's much longer, partly because of what's happening overseas. A lot of countries are highly indebted now, having spent quite appropriately large sums of money to support people in work, businesses, etc. during this lockdown period. But now they've reached an economic imperative where they need to open up their economies. And on the other side, what we're now seeing is these huge levels of reinfection, like in America, 50,000 per day regularly for the last couple of weeks.
Sure.
And so we've now got this dichotomy, and I think what we're facing is actually quite a much longer term problem, whereas we thought we're going to do the sugar hit, get through the problem, and then we'd be fine. Actually, I think what we're all facing in New Zealand, even though we're relatively isolated, is this issue that could be quite some years. And I think what that means in terms of economic policies is that if you take certain sectors, and the one I normally quote is the airline sectors. So I have met so many airline pilots and airline staff who have all been wonderful employees, very smart, as you know, all that sort of stuff. But because of their industry has now basically been demolished for the next few years, these people are what we're going to have to deal with in terms of trying to get back into employment and try and create new businesses so we can employ more people.
Sure.
So that's the first group. And we've never had to worry about that middle tier before.
Right.
And they're certainly too wealthy to go and get support from the government. So helping them migrate into new vocations and hopefully set up new businesses is one of the key things that we have to do.
Right.
In the small
So when you
business.
talk about that, so do you mean to say the Labour or the Prime Minister and Labour Party, they have announced about the retraining of that migrant force? So are we talking about the same middle income, high earning workforce that we are aiming to retrain here?
No, I think where the government is focused, and quite rightly so, they've come out with quite a substantial apprenticeships program. And in my paper, I actually said we need to do that. And so we fully support that. We just hope it's going to deliver the outcomes that we want. But that is one group that normally gets most badly affected in recessions. So apprentices is fine. The other category that normally gets affected is the sort of plus 50-year-old who unfortunately gets fired from companies.
Right.
In my view, quite wrongly, because they have the most experience. But so dealing with those two groups is fine. There's this new group who can actually help repower the economy. And then the fourth group actually are the returning New Zealanders who've maybe living in England, India, America, wherever, and want to come and live back in New Zealand. And I think if you talk about small business, the opportunity to grow our way out using these people as the catalyst to do it is really, really essential. And I'd say to you, Sandra, we are past the health crisis. We're increasingly moving into this economic crisis. And there is no way we can tax our way out of this.
Sure.
The problem now is too large. And we've got to learn to grow and work out how to grow our way out of it. And people are the way to do it.
Right, I get that point. Now, the thing is, we have two crises on hand. One was health crisis, and now we are going into that financial recession part. So, do you think the government has done their part well in the health crisis, managing the health crisis?
Yeah, I think in the main, the government has done a great job in terms of managing that aspect. I think we always had concerns about the border. And that's why, even if we go back during the COVID select committee process, I don't know whether you're ever bored enough to watch them, but the actual hearings, repeatedly every day, we were asking about what was happening at the border because we knew things were happening and people weren't being properly assessed whether they had a COVID infection or not. And I think that issue is certainly was never properly adequately dealt with it. But we're lucky. We're a country.
But I think, yes, no, fair enough. I get your point. But I think government has tidied up that part. But getting in two ministers, looking after that border thing, getting in armed forces there as well, supervision. So isn't that looked after? Are you happy with that?
That part broadly we are now, and we just, our problem was, I think for all of New Zealanders, it would have been much better if they'd been quicker to do that, but that they finally got there, and that's okay. The other thing is, I think in terms of the economic package during the COVID lockdown, we would have done some things a little bit differently. We supported the wage subsidy, but basically it was at 50% of the average wage.
Right.
Virtually every other country in the world did 80%. So what we would have done is actually done probably a higher amount, but for a shorter period of time.
Right.
But the one hole that has never been addressed and still hasn't been addressed is that if you look at the profit and loss of a small business, wages are normally 40%, so they're being covered for half that. The next biggest bit is rental costs.
Right.
And actually, we worked it out. To provide a 50% subsidy for rental on industrial and commercial properties in New Zealand would have cost about 300 million a month.
Okay.
It's actually quite a small amount.
It is. So you mean to say that you would have handled that wage subsidy scheme a little bit differently? Probably you would have given a little bit more money in that, is that right? Generously, yeah. Right. So have you suggested or brought out a policy on that, or suggested to the government?
Well, of course, we're now moving on, but the reason...
But you never said to government that, look, go and increase the wage subsidy amount to employees.
No, there was never consultation. I suppose that's one of the most disappointing thing about the COVID lockdown. I think a lot of the public were hoping that we were going to come together. Unfortunately, it didn't come to pass.
Right.
But the reason I'm highlighting those two aspects in particular is that I'm very worried about our small businesses now, because basically they had 2.5 months where they didn't have any revenue coming in.
Sure.
They had 10 days and then they invoiced, and they had 30 days later they're going to get paid. So basically they had 4 months of no cash.
Definitely.
And I'm very worried about it, because even though we've had the wage subsidy carry on, it's going to stop 3 weeks before the election. The reality, our small businesses are very cash constrained now.
Definitely.
Now, you and I both know, and I've owned lots of small businesses, that the biggest thing for small businesses is protecting cash. And because the government hasn't put in the right package to make sure they can husband their cash, they're now particularly vulnerable.
Sure. And so government, what they did actually, they proposed offer to small businesses to go out and take loan, which is again a debt, isn't it?
Yeah, but that's the issue. If you're running a business, right, and you've got no cash, and you are worrying about your future, because even now, for certain businesses, they don't know what the future holds. We assume that it's going to be a take-up in domestic stuff, but a lot of businesses, they have no vision around that.
Sure. And
so you're asking directors, managers, owners to go out and borrow more money. Most of them will not want to do that, because one, it goes against their director duties, but secondly, why would you take on more debt at the very time? And so that was my point. We needed to actually provide a lot more cash to these businesses earlier on, so they're in a better position. Because the only way to break that thing, if you're a business owner, if you're not going to take on more debt, you've still got declined sales down. The only thing is get rid of staff. And so last month we had 40,000 people go. We're probably going to have a similar number. And what really worries me, Sandy, is when the wage subsidy stops 3 weeks before the election, I believe there's going to be a substantial number of people made redundant.
Definitely.
Really worries me.
But a lot of experts, they are concurring with what you were saying. Now, coming back to what National could do differently, National has come up with their own Job Start scheme, where they are offering businesses with a grant of $10,000 for hiring each individual full-time work employee, right? So that's the one policy. What a new national government will do differently for these small businesses?
Well, we've done actually 3 things.
Right.
So, first one is, in terms of looking after people who are employed by businesses, we have reaffirmed that we are going to deal with this, what's called fiscal drag, which means people through inflation end up going into a higher tax bracket. So we are going to stop that. We're going to inflation adjust every 3 years to make sure people are not paying more tax. And of course that affects the people on the lowest amount of income.
Right.
So because they don't end up jumping into the top tax bracket. So we've reaffirmed that. It's a $660 million policy.
Right. Okay.
Second thing we've done is that we've announced that we will provide for immediate write-off, for companies to immediately write off in 1 year, up to 150,000 of new equipment, plant and equipment.
Right,
And
okay.
so the previous or the current write-off rules are roughly about 5,000 for a piece of plant.
Right.
We've raised that to 150,000 because what we're trying to do...
That's for a new investment, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
What we're trying to do is help companies who may want to expand, who may want to update their technology, whatever, to be able to go and do that and get the tax, because obviously get
Sure.
28%
So is it more focused in the manufacturing sector only, or
No.
you would be covering all service industry and other things in small
but
businesses?
it's plant and equipment.
Plant
But
equipment,
it's
right.
not, we're obviously not trying to incentivize people to go and buy a whole lot of consumer goods. So it's a way for businesses to recapitalize, to actually go and invest, which is part of that growth story that I was telling you about. The only way New Zealand's going to get out of this is by growing our way out of it, not by taxing. The other area, obviously, is what we've talked about, is helping people business owners, to take on new staff. So it's 10,000 per person and a maximum of 100,000 per business.
Sure.
And so that's one thing. So those are the three things we've announced. There's some more to come.
Right. Okay. So can we expect anything in terms of the commercial rent that was sitting as debt for these small businesses owners when they actually went through this COVID-like lockdown thing? Can they expect anything from a future national government?
Well, obviously we've still got 2 months before the election. And whether we get to that point that actually we have to start thinking about the next evolution, we would have done that at the outset 3 months ago.
Right.
3.5 months ago. That's would have been an easy thing to do 3.5 months ago. We're now at a situation where after the election, we're going to have lots of unemployed people. And what we will be doing, and we will be announcing, are policies around helping people to get into business and to work out how to employ more people. So there's a lot more to come in that area.
All right. Okay. And 2 months, I think we can expect a lot of policies in that space, right?
Oh, they're starting all the time now.
All right. Okay.
Infrastructure's one.
Well, yeah, sure. We have heard of that. And I saw you there as well. You were present in that infrastructure announcement. So how confident are you that we will be able to see the grand youth plan of connecting those 4 cities by mid-30s?
Well, that's a big thing. We have that's certainly the vision that the Judith has laid out.
But money is not still accounted or funded for those policies?
Well, for that 31 billion, we were quite clear how we funded it.
All right. Okay.
So there's a portion of reallocation within the NZ land transport funding.
Coming on that reallocation, there's probably you are looking at reallocating 6.1 billion. Is that right?
Well, there's actually a number of reallocations. So one is Mr. Robinson's walking around with a 20 billion
check
bulge in his back pocket.
Sure.
And he hasn't specified how he's going to spend it.
Fair enough. Right? Just to let our viewers explain about that 20 billion talker that Andrew is pointing out, that in the last budget, government has taken, or rather earmarked, $50 billion worth of COVID-19 related funding expenditure. Out of that, they have already spent around 30 billion, and they have kept 20 billion aside, which they want to spend. And Andrew Bailey and National Party is rightly eyeing on that as well, isn't it?
Well, some of it, because we don't believe we have to spend everything.
Okay,
right?
okay.
We're not that ill-disciplined.
Right.
And that's one of the things we're going to be much more disciplined. So one is taking a portion of that. One is reallocating some of the money that's already been allocated for some projects, which we think are freeze-free and all those sort of projects.
Right.
We're going to take money.
Stopping you right there, in terms of those projects related to transport in the Auckland region, so do you think that you have not pointed out, National has not pointed out what projects you are going to X?
Well, they haven't done anything.
Right. Okay.
Hard to say we're not going. Do you know that the Auckland Council, for the Auckland fuel tax, that this increase in the fuel tax that all Aucklanders pay, is that I understand is 150 million sitting in an account that hasn't been spent yet. So they're taxing us all every time we go to the pump, and yet we've got money sitting in the account, right? So actually, they haven't done anything. This is the biggest issue, in my view, that this government has done, because I used to have the building construction portfolio, and when I talk to people and also in the infrastructure sector, all the people we spent 40 billion in Christchurch, 20 billion of it from government money, you and I, right, as well as the private sector, another 20 billion. So 40 billion was spent. There were thousands of workers that went to Christchurch and learnt new skills. How to build roads, how to do gas lines, as well as build buildings, right? When it came to the end of that project, and it is in the wind down now, rather than say, right, we need to mobilise that now highly trained resource, let's start doing some roads, let's doing some buildings, and the most classic one is when you come out of the Christchurch airport, the new road to Ashburton got closed, stopped, even though the diggers were in it. It is wrong. What this government has not done is it's not carried on a program so we get this highly skilled workforce starting new projects and staying engaged. And so the government's announced a $12 billion package. Whoopsie-doo, because I'll tell you what's happened in Victoria and New South Wales. 12, 18 months ago, they announced a $100 billion infrastructure program. So where did all those Christchurch workers go? Because there's no work in New Zealand. And all they could see was projects being closed. They all got on a plane and flew to Victoria and New South Wales. It's a travesty for New Zealand.
Right. So what you are essentially suggesting, and for the benefit of our audiences, that government in New Zealand, they need to have a pipeline of infrastructure programs ready so that everyone knows what next project is going to start, so that probably we can direct our funds, and most importantly, we can use this highly skilled resources. Is that right? Okay. So you are promising that under Judith, probably for next next couple of decades, we will create a pipeline. 4 terms. Okay.
Terms.
Get that. So you are making a plan of creating a robust infrastructure pipeline. Is that right?
Yeah, very much so.
Right. Okay. That's good.
And actually doing it. Right. It's great saying, we're going to build lots of roads, but actually you've got to do it. You actually got to procure it quickly. You've got to make sure you've got the right people there at the time, and you've got to make it happen.
Right. Okay. Now, coming to your new portfolio that you have rightly not bargained, as you pointed out, discussed with Judith, your leader.
I asked it, and she immediately saw the benefit and said, wow, what a great idea.
Great. Okay. So what's your vision in that space, in that manufacturing space?
Manufacturing, yeah. It's interesting. I've been talking to a number of representatives even in the last week or so. And I think just interesting, the scale of it, I mentioned it before, but manufacturing accounts for 10% of the New Zealand economy in terms of GDP and 250,000 people, and roughly generates about 30 billion of income, revenue. Right? It's massive, right?
It is.
And I think you've got to disaggregate it. So one is sort of metal-based manufacturing, so dairy industry, Fonterra, and then our aluminium sector. So that's in that sort of metal, if I can use that term. Then there's ceramics, and then there's composite. Our Team New Zealand down in the waterfront use a lot of composite technologies. So those are sort of the 4 broad parts, and then the other bit we've got is plastics.
Okay.
And plastic manufacturing. And I think all of them have certain attributes within them. But broadly, the first thing I've noticed is there's not a strong representation by a manufacturing lobby. There was a very good report issued last year, when it came out, actually it was released this year, but pointing out some of the areas where manufacturing in New Zealand's under pressure. Some of it's from cheap imports coming in from overseas. Some of it is from lack of skills. Some of it's lack of capital write-off, and that's why depreciation, the 150,000 is a step towards that. But I also think at a governance level, we actually don't have enough strong representation from a manufacturing entity as such. And I understand there's only a few people based in MB focused solely on manufacturing. So I think we need to reevaluate how important manufacturing is in New Zealand and make sure we're getting the right sort of advice coming through, advocating, and then seeing that translate through into how we're going to grow and continue to grow manufacturing in New Zealand, but also how do we bring the right skills and then also the other frameworks that we're going to need to do to
Sure.
put in place.
Yeah, it's going to be a hell lot of tasks, isn't it? Because nobody else has, previous MPs have actually looked after that portfolio. So,
Well, not really. There's no one had the blowtorch looking at just
right.
manufacturing.
All right, okay. So I appreciate your vision in that space. And but talking about manufacturing, we need a lot of things, and I think one will be skilled workforce, as you're talking about. And when we are going into a post-COVID world, do you have enough trained people? I would say the reason why I'm asking this question is that how it's going to impact on our immigration policy. That would be, and also important intake. So has there been discussion with the National Party? Like, what's their vision going to be related to immigration in the post-COVID world?
Yeah, so just dealing with the first part of that question, when I asked them the other day, I said, well, come on, you talk about skill shortages, where do you have them? And they were indicating that we have a lot shortage in project management skills. So this is me now needing to get alongside my colleague, Dr. Shane Retty, and saying to him, look, there looks like there's a gap in manufacturing of these types of high-level skills, and I obviously will get more visibility around that, and saying, look, we need to work out how we set up the training arrangements, and whether it might be tertiary or maybe vocational training to provide that shortfall. So that's why I need to be very clear, or have a clear steer from the manufacturing industry as to where the specific shortfall is, and then we can design programs around it. But in terms of immigration, I think, and I set this out in this paper I did a while ago, I think we're going to see a change in the makeup of New Zealand and the way we're going to operate. If you accept my proposition that this is going to be a 3, 4, maybe 5-year thing before we get back to normality, because not because of what's happening in New Zealand, but what's happening in America, Europe, everywhere else, then the days of wholesale immigration, although it's very, very tough to get into New Zealand, but the days of a lot of immigration, I think the first priority really will have to be on returning New Zealanders, and we've got a problem with that at the moment. But getting those returning New Zealanders back into New Zealand, and then making sure that those people who have lost their jobs, like the airline pilots we talked about, or the younger people, all the over the 50, have the opportunity to get into jobs, because that should be our first port of call to make sure that everyone in New Zealand actually has the opportunity to get a job.
Have your party put some numbers when we're talking about these people?
No, that's part of what we're all working through at the moment.
But the reason why I ask you is that this afternoon itself, we have heard Winston Peters coming out with some definite numbers where he's saying he's looking at just around 15,000 in terms of the numbers that he would be wanting to bring from overseas. So it's interesting to see what National Party, what kind of numbers they are working on, if they have got some numbers.
Well, we haven't got to that point, and there'll obviously be an immigration announcement pretty soon. But what I'm saying to you, Winston can quote numbers, and I don't know what the bases are, and I've seen the announcement this afternoon. But I think in terms of making sure that New Zealand businesses have sufficient access to people is crucial. And what I'm saying is the first port of call will be returning New Zealanders, and those in New Zealand who highly skilled but have the opportunity to move into new vocations. That's got to be the first priority. Then I think if we've got to deal with this border issue, because I don't think any New Zealanders want us to bring back people when we can't safely process them through our quarantine.
Fair enough. Well,
and we're not seeing that at the moment. I don't think most of us have enough confidence about the arrangements yet.
Sure.
That will change. And I think at that point, we will have to be very discerning about what are the skills that we need and how we allow them to come in.
Surely. Well, I completely understand and agree with you. It is too soon, actually, and we need to see concrete action both from government and national in opposition as well, so that New Zealanders get a fair chance to see who have a better plan, who have a clearer plan. This is not a normal election that we're going to face in 20. It's going to be a first post-COVID election, so we need to see a better clarity on that. So I think, we had a good discussion, Andrew, and before I let you go for today, recently you are a local MP from Hunua, which has changed to Port Waikato. So a lot of things have changed over there. So just need to understand how this change in boundary commission affected your electorate. Like, has it increased the size, decreased, or what's happening over there?
Yeah, well, I've, as you probably know, every census that's held every 5 years, that looks at the increase in the population in New Zealand, and they deem out that where there's a new seat required. The way the process works is it's undertaken by a judge.
Yeah, fair enough. Yep.
What they do is they start in Northland, and they work their way down through West Auckland and North Auckland and down across, and they work out where they're going to put the new seat. This particular situation, they've created the new seat of Takanini, which includes Flatbush, which I had 11,000 people in my existing electorate.
Right.
So I've lost 11,000 to the new seat of Flatbush or Takanini. And then as a result of that being squeezed in there, Judith Collins's Papakura seat has changed. She lost some to the new seat, and she's now picked up all my side from basically the motorway at Bombay right across to Beachlands, Kaukaua Bay, etc. And so I've lost that. I've lost 33,000 people in total.
Right, okay.
And so my seat of Port Waikato now takes in Pukeko and Waiku, which it always did, but swings south and goes down as far, it takes in Te Kauphere, Rangaruri,
Pokeno,
of course, and it goes right down to Te Akau, which is a big farming area.
Right, okay. So essentially that's more a rural seat, isn't it? It is.
No, yeah, more real proper farming, but there's still a lot of urban. You know, Pokeno, Te Kauphere, Tuakau are largely commuter type operations.
Okay, so I just got one last question. Thanks for your time. One last question that since Judith's elevation as a leader, what you have been hearing from your electorate?
Very, very positive feedback. Fabulous. And a lot of texting, a lot of Facebooks. Also, people are very happy that I've been recognised by Judith. But the third thing is we announced as part of the infrastructure plan that we're going to extend the electrification, not just to Pukekohe, to Pokeno. So that takes in Tuakau and Pokeno. For anyone living in Auckland, we're going to do the motorway not just to Drury, but actually to Ramarama.
Right.
And of course, that then opens up 5,000 jobs around the area of Drury that's been created. And the third thing we're doing is we're going to actually go back to the original plan for Mill Road, which is an alternative motorway, because the southern part of Auckland, when anyone goes south to Bombay, there's only one route in and one route out.
Sure.
And this Mill Road will be a four-lane motorway, and that will be an alternative. So if you've got a blockage on the southern motorway, you will be able to go down an alternative motorway.
Sure.
So
Well, that's
great news.
Definitely it is, and it's a plan of your all big infrastructure plan. And thanks for sharing that. Thanks for sharing your insight. I'm pretty sure our viewers would have loved this conversation, and they would have a lot of questions. And we will come back to you, speak to you again sometime before elections. So thanks for your time today, Andrew.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you.